Hi everyone, welcome to Pulse Social's podcast. I'm Rida Idrees, a trainee sports journalist. Today I spoke with Deborah Dilworth, who is the head of women's sports at the Football Supporters Association. We spoke about how she got into football, her role at the FSA, and how we should work to increase engagement in women's sports. So let's get into the interview. Okay, so hi Deborah, thank you for joining me today. So if you could just quickly give an introduction of yourself and who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Deborah Dilworth. I'm the head of women's football at the Football Supporters Association.
Yeah, so the first question I wanted to kind of ask you just to get into it was how you got into football, like where your passion for sports in general started and how it led to football and where you are now.
So I've always loved sports. Like I've loved playing sports. I like the feeling of, competing in a team or individually. And I kind of have always found it like a helpful thing to do to make me a healthy and happy person. And so I started playing football randomly, actually. I was playing at primary school with the lads in the playground a little bit, but it's quite hard. And then when I started secondary school, who ended up being a best friend of mine invited me to play football with a structured session. So I'd never done structured football up until the point she invited me. And so I went along with her to the session and then played ever since. And then I started sort of coaching in football probably at university. So I'd sort of done a bit of the playing and then decided to do a bit of the coaching. Went out to the States for a little while to coach, and then came back here and did a football masters. And so I've sort of had several random kind of experiences across football, but I've loved it. It's been very interesting. And now I'm the head of women's football at the FSA, working with supporters and volunteers within communities. So a varied approach to football, but I still do football coaching as well and try and play every now and then.
So is that coaching, you coach girls, or is it like mixed?
So I have always been quite passionate about making sure that I'm a coach across men's and women's or boys and girls. Currently, what I do is beginners, women's, and 11-a-side football. So it's for women.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, obviously you've always had kind of that love of football, you're saying, like since you were little, and a lot of people say, especially females, that they don't see that sort of like they don't see the role models kind of in the sports. Did you find that, or like within football?
I think so. I think there's a lack of visibility, and then women who are role models or have been role models previously is sort of been kind of hidden, and then also they've been given a lot harder time, and I think that's been tricky for people. So like the perception of women in leadership roles within football, whether that be coaches, managers, sort of it's the cultural norms aren't accepted. I think there is a lack of visibility across the board for many different women as well, from different backgrounds, and that is still a problem. I also think whilst there's been a lot of progress made, the treatment in and around, or like the perceptions of women is still poor, can be still poor, and the environment that they have to sort of like still have to fight really hard sometimes. Still very male dominated. Actually, just the other day I was walking across on a football session I was doing, and somebody said to me, a male coach said to me, "Oh, I thought you were a player, because I'm not used to seeing women coaching." And he meant that in a very innocent way and didn't mean anything by it, but I kind of think that that's telling. It's still in that, there's still a perception that women don't hold certain positions within football and across sport, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think like we can do to make that better, like increase females in the leadership roles?
I think there's some really good work being done across stakeholders to sort of create different environments for people to learn in and to sort of feel supported in and empowered by. There needs to be a lot more work done, and hopefully will be being done in terms of like visibility on the pitch as well, and making sure like there's access and fair access to facilities to the right facilities as well, because it's not like everybody can just lump up to a pitch and it'd be fine. You know, there's got to be like specific needs being met. So I think there is quite a lot of work being done, and it's sort of like driving that forwards as best as possible. But everybody needs to be intentional in what they're doing, and needs to actually like actively look at and challenge what they're doing consistently and say, am I doing my best, or am I like pushing to try to get representation, you know, in varying different ways. So for example, if it was on a board and you had an all-male board, what are those men doing to intentionally involve and help train and develop a diverse group of people? Those kind of things are really important. I still think there's less of that on the board level, but maybe in some of the grassroots initiatives there's work being done. So my colleague Anwar actually, or was my colleague, but now works for the FA, you know, he's a front runner in this, and some of the initiatives that he's done on a supporter perspective to try to sort of showcase visibility and like experiences and sort of cater towards bespoke catering to make sure people are included. Some of his work has done in our organisation was fantastic, and now he's doing that for the FA.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you also worked at the FA. So what was like your kind of role there?
My role at the FA was a coach mentor. So okay. I was working at a local grassroots football club to try to mentor coaches, which has been interesting. But that was an interesting role from a perspective of a woman, because I think I worked pretty much with all male coaches. So that dynamic was really interesting, because I traditionally you sort of would see that it would potentially be the other way around, that the men might have more knowledge. So I think like even that was an interesting time, but I had wonderful support from my manager at the time called Steve Smithies. He's Cheshire CEO now, and he was just a wonderful support to me. So I was able to kind of challenge myself in the role and sort of think, oh, I actually do know more than I thought I did, which was nice.
So then if we move on to like your role now at the Football Supporters Association, where you're the head of women's football. So from my research, I found that the values are to develop women's football as a whole and ensure that the supporters are represented within decision making, and then also push for positive change and change narratives around women's football. So can you tell me a bit about like your role and the work you do within the FSA?
Yeah, so the work is fairly new, I would say. So the FSA was formed out of two supporter organisations, Supporters Direct, which dealt with quite a lot of governance related things, and the Football Supporters Federation, which was like quite match day experiences and sort of away ticketing and treatment of fans. They combined, and then I was the EFL network manager at that point, but I had a passion for women's football. I coach, I play, I'm a qualified ref, you know, like you name it, I've probably got that hat. And so I was like, there's got to be support given to fans in the women's game, and to sort of push against this barrier that like nobody cares around women's football, and that there's no supporters and all this other rubbish that gets kind of perpetuated. So I was looking after and trying to build the women's game stuff on top of the EFL stuff. So I went out to the 2019 World Cup just to see if there was traction to do something on a domestic level. We spoke to loads of supporters, and that's how the Free Lionesses campaign was like started. We spoke to loads of supporters, and then that kicked off domestic stuff here. I was doing some work around women's football in Supporters Direct, and there was a national council member at the FSF, that was doing some work around the women's game, and that chap was called Ian Todd. So there was sort of like embers, if you will, and then I've just tried to like kick it on up until the point to today. So in August 2019, we had no members that were women's game supporters groups, and now we're probably at about 54, 55. So it's really grown, and it proves the point that actually fans want to be represented in the women's game, and they want to support and do support. So yeah, it's been, we're growing in our strategic aims of sort of developing supporters groups, but also developing the voice that fans have. And we've had to deal with quite a lot of things actually in the last couple of years. You know, we've got the Carney review that's been happening, the government review that's with Karen Carney that's been happening across the last year or so. So we've been heavily involved in that. And then Euros 2022, World Cup 2023. So yeah, it's been good to sort of see the progress.
Yeah. So what are the biggest issues that you think you face in the FSA?
In for the women's game specifically? Yeah, so for the women's game specifically, you've got sort of a lack of structure that affects the women's game and a lack of resource. So that does happen in the men's game, but the chronic kind of underfunding or investment and then the stretched resource then can make it difficult for clubs. The lack of like knowledge around supporter engagement and sort of what that means in the women's game and how you have to bespoke it then can create a bit of difficulty. So clubs that are under resourced and then are just trying to get the games ahead and dealing with their own infrastructure issues, then thinking about supporter engagement can feel like a push too far, or it's just something that they don't think about because they feel that they've got minimal amounts of fans. So there's a bit of a structure and infrastructure kind of issue, and then like match day experience. So if we just look at match day, you know, it can be really difficult for supporters to find information about match day, to get access. You know, the public transport can be really difficult. Away travel can be difficult. There's been a number of issues around like the undervaluing of away fans, and that's doesn't feel very nice. And also it's a shame because there's actually a lot of people that do want to travel away, but they just don't have the mechanisms to do it. The broadcast stuff that's come in, there's sort of issues around potentially you know, deprioritizing match going fans for eyeballs on the TV, and that's something that happens in the men's game as well. So, you know, and there's also got to be a balance of, you know, you want investment in the women's game, but it's just like, what's the best way to do it? And supporters really are key stakeholders. So yeah, there's a number of barriers really, but that's why it's important that the Women's Game Network exists, and you've got endless amounts of volunteers that are working in their communities to try to like push supporters' voice at a local level and a national level.
Yeah, so with these issues, you say that there's the volunteers and everything. So how do they usually deal with them, and like how do they take the steps towards once like addressing, you find the issues, and how do you deal with them?
So now we've had a lot of progress in terms of like the work that we've been doing with the FA. So thanks to the Kelly and Holly at the FA, we've now got a structured engagement meeting which happens twice a season to go in and sort of talk about the differing issues that might be affecting supporters, and that's from across the pyramid. So there's not a laser focus on the WSL and the Championship. It's really important that the pyramid like moves, and you know, there's investment at the bottom end as well as just the top end. So we have a mechanism that we can use to report stuff on a national level, and that's particularly handy when supporters groups are talking and going, oh, I'm affected by that issue, or we're affected by that issue, so you can take it nationally. So that's one level. And then you've got the local sort of engagement, which we're just kind of trying to work on to sort of encourage clubs to make sure they prioritize supporter engagement. So you've got some really good examples across WSL and Championship. Bristol City is one of them. They've got a specific agreement, a memorandum of understanding between the Supporters Trust and the women's game as well as the men's game over the club, sorry. So that means that they have structured meetings, they do minutes, they action the minutes, and it's all quite transparent. And you've got other examples. West Ham have a sort of specific supporters board for the women's team. So on a local level, you're starting to get this more structured approach, which actually just helps everybody. Everybody then kind of has a clarity on where to go with issues or suggestions, and then how that then might be dealt with. It's not perfect, and there's still quite a lot of work to do, and this is still minimal, I would say, across the clubs, but that's why we're here, to try to help support that. And we do a lot of club liaison work. So if there was an issue with a supporters group and a club communicating, we would go in and try to facilitate and mediate that sometimes, because it can be a tricky conversation, and clubs don't like to feel that they're being criticised, but equally you need a critical friend to work with, and that's where it's working really well, is like where there's that balance. Yeah.
So if you were to have someone like from the outside just looking into this, what would the main thing you would say, like main advice you'd give them about women's sport increasing engagement? what would the main advice be, you think?
The main advice would be make sure supporters are key to your engagement. Make sure it's genuine and authentic. There's no point in trying to do supporter engagement if you're not genuinely interested. It needs to be from the heart. You need to be interested. From a supporter perspective, is if you're not part of a supporters group and you have a local one, then go try and join them and support the work, or start your own. So we're very active in trying to encourage people to support and ensuring that like everybody has a voice. That's really important. You know, the women's game is often said, you know, it's often suggested that it's welcoming and inclusive, but that needs to be protected, and it also needs to be upheld, and it's got to be for everybody. It can't just be a line that's said and is not genuinely carried out by everybody.
Yeah, no, definitely. So you already mentioned the Free Lionesses campaign. So ahead of the Women's World Cup as well, like you're like pushing it as well. So could you just tell us what this is about, like the just its aims and its goals, and like what you want to get from it?
Yeah, so Free Lionesses was born in 2019. It's the fan embassy service for travelling England fans following the women's team. Free Lions is the sort of, we're the sister of Free Lions, basically, and they've been around for about 20 years, providing supporter services for travelling England fans that follow the men's team. So the main aims of Free Lionesses is to provide community meetups for supporters, because often there's quite a lot of lone travellers, and also just to create a bit of match day atmosphere before games, is to provide a free supporters guide. So, for example, we are setting up one for the Women's World Cup, and that will be given free to supporters, and it includes like important information about money, you know, electronic devices, host city information, just general stuff in and around the tournament that might be handy to have. And then it's also to provide like a support service. So, for example, in the Women's World Cup in 2019, we had somebody that had lost their phone, lost their passports. So we try to support those people if they're struggling and if they need a bit of help. And then also it's just nice to sort of provide opportunities to meet other England fans, because it's a growing community at the minute. So there's some beautiful stories that came out of the 2019 World Cup, which people were telling me over the last couple of months around, you know, I met such and such at the community meet up in Nice, and now I've attended their wedding. Like there's such lovely stories that come out of that, and that's really important for us as well. Free Lions works slightly differently. It's a bit more transactional or transitional. So, you know, there's not the community meetups, but they go and grab a supporters guide, so they have a bit of a chat and then they move on. Whereas ours is a bit more staying in one place and all together and creating a bit of atmosphere there.
Okay, yeah, that sounds really good. So I want to move on to like the idea of like female football and men's football. And a lot of the time when we talk about the engagement with female sports, we say we want to get it to the level that men's football is. So I wanted to ask you, should that be the goal? And do you think that can be achieved?
So I'll from my opinion, I struggle with this a little bit, because I don't think that men's sports should necessarily be the comparator or the goal. You know, can we innovate? Can we be creative? We've got our own qualities and things to celebrate. And this is one of the difficulties that I find around this topic, is that actually there's some moves that have then just basically gone, well, we'll replicate what happens in the men's game. And I just think that's such a shame. So from a supporter perspective, if you sort of package something the same as the men's game and you just slap on the same sort of processes and parameters, you potentially are then going to create some of the problems that we see in the men's game. That could be avoided, but it requires a bit of sort of innovation and creativity. And that does happen across some sectors of the women's sports. I don't think we should use the men's, you know, games as an example in a way. I don't think we should be striving for that. I think we should just be striving to be different and creative and, you know, innovate in a different way. There's a lot of opportunities to not replicate the same problems that are in the men's game. So if you think like rogue owners and crisis clubs, and but I think some of what's happening at the minute is then going down that path, and that's a shame.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So kind of the last thing I want to ask you, just a bit on a lighter note, the World Cup is obviously coming up. So what do you think are the chances of England winning?
We're going to win. We're going to win. Might hope 20th of August, the trophy's ours. I would love
existence.
That. Yeah. So 2 back-to-back tournaments would be amazing.
Yeah.
How about you? What is your prediction?
Yeah, definitely England all the way. So so that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for joining me. It was really interesting to see the supporter side of it. I think it's a very different angle, so I think it's important to hear about as well. So
amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.